Welcome back to the Candy Colored Studio. This is Katrina Berg. I'm here with my new beautiful friend, Tricia Petrey. Tricia, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you too. And I am seriously so excited that you're here. So Tricia and I have kind of been brought together by Kismet friend, our dear friend, Colleen Clark, who I just found out used to be Tricia's neighbor. And so a lot of the things that you'll hear Tricia talk about today are things that kind of started when Tricia and Colleen were neighbors, which I just learned about. So this is kind of exciting. So as you're listening, I'm sure that you have felt over the past year during the pandemic that things have felt a little uncomfortable, and you have had this need to go and reach out to friends or loved ones that you haven't heard from for a while, and somehow you find other people that are thinking similarly to you, and so you tend to get to be together. And so this is kind of what happened. This is how Tricia and I met. So Tricia and I ended up in this beautiful little chat group with her dear friend and our dear friend Colleen. And so that's how we met. And so this is part 4 of the series about respecting and giving choice, and also specifically agency. And I invited Tricia to come and talk because she has had an amazing journey and she has lots of experiences that she can share. And what I just want to say is a disclaimer to you listening today, that while you're listening, make sure you listen to your heart, and whatever your heart tells you to do, both Tricia and I welcome you to follow it. Don't feel like our journey should be the same as yours. It's obviously meant to be different, and we are here to support you, but we also hope that you will find a way to learn these things, or learn the things that you're supposed to learn, that your heart's inviting you to learn on your own, right? So you might have questions, so go for it. And as our dear friend Colleen reminds us, the best place to find things is not going to be on Google. And it's okay, you can censor me for that, Google. It's going to be in other places. You might need to reach out to friends and family. You might need to look into search engines such as DuckDuckGo and using a Brave browser. What else do you have to suggest about that?
That's what I have to suggest too. Yeah. Just Google is limited for sure. So expanding. Yeah.
I like that word, expand. So consider that word as we talk today. Now, I forgot to mention this, Tricia, but we might just refer to things today as a jab, if that's okay, just because people get censored when we talk about these things. Are you guys excited? We are going to talk about it today. We are talking about the jab. Just get excited. So yeah, we're going to call it that, just so that we don't get censored, so that you can go ahead and listen to it. And then however else we want to describe it. But if we could try to use different words when we get to that portion.
I will do my best.
She will do her best, you guys. And if it pops out, I'm sure it won't matter. But it's just good to know, because I think we have amazing things that are trying to capture us doing these things. Okay, saying these specific words. All right, so let's get started. I am super excited to learn more about Tricia. I have a little idea, and we do have several things in common, which I'm super excited. But I would love for you to share with our listeners today just a little bit about your family. Anything that you would be willing to share about you and your family.
All right. Well, I'm married and a mother of 5 children. My kids range in age. They're all teenagers right now, which is pretty unique, I guess. I had them all very close together. So they were all babies and toddlers together, and they were little kids together and big kids together. And now they're all teenagers together. So they range in age from 13 to 19. A 19-year-old boy, and then I have 4 girls, finishing off with a set of twins that are 13, which is similar to you, which is kind of fun. So we currently live in the Salt Lake Valley. I grew up in California in the Bay Area, but went to high school in Utah, graduated here, and then attended BYU, excuse me, where I majored in genealogy there and French. So that's my first love, is genealogy. I have a passion for it, for that problem solving, that the research really is my passion. I love to research and to tell the stories of people in the past, and to put those stories together. I love the mystery of it, the hunt, I guess you could say. And I've always loved everything that's old too. So that kind of fit in with things that I had felt growing up too. I kind of fell into it. I didn't really initially choose that. It kind of came my way, and then I found out that that was something that I loved. So that's my first passion with research. I then, during college, served an LDS mission to Montreal, to Quebec, a French-speaking mission there. Prior to that, I had done a study abroad in Israel that was really transformational for me. I met my husband while I was doing an internship for my major in Washington, D.C., and he was living out there working. He's originally from Pennsylvania, but also grew up mostly in Utah, but had moved out to the DC area where we met. And we dated on and off for, really, it was about 5 years between the time that we met and were married. I was the runaway bride. Ultimately, we were just had a lot of fear of marriage and that decision. And so it took a while for things to work out, but never looked back after that. So we were married both a little bit later in life. And so, which I guess you could say is why our kids came rather quickly. But we started out in California, then lived in Utah for a while, and later moved to the Seattle area, and then back to Utah, and then to Virginia, to the Washington, D.C. area, and back to Utah again. So we've moved around quite a bit in our marriage. We've been married 20 years, almost 21, and have moved, I think, 13 times in those 20 years. So it's kind of turned into a joke, and I own it. It's it's just our story, lots of chapters of our lives and of our novel, and I've loved each one of them. So, I mean, that's a little bit about me and about my family. I have homeschooled all of my kids over the past 10 years, but not all of them at the same time. I just, I think some of it was me feeling I was in survival mode for many years while they were little, and I felt that I wasn't able to be the kind of mother that I wanted to be to them when once they started going to school. And where they started going to school was mostly in Virginia. They had really long days. School was a little bit longer there, and they had to leave earlier, and they got home later. So they were gone much of the day. And then once they would get home, there was such a rush well, first I wanted them to get outside and play. And then it was, we got to have dinner, and you've got to do your homework, and you've got to do your reading, and we've got to go to bed. And, and in the morning it was hurry, 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 eat your breakfast, get your clothes on, get out the door, so I kept feeling this, everything's rushed. And I don't want that. I want a slower life, and I want time with my children. And just because of my situation and my circumstances, I wasn't able to figure that balance out. And so that's ultimately what led me to homeschool, along with just some questions I had about the system of education that we are putting our children in at a very early age. That started to bring some questions to my mind, and I started to just question the system, I guess, is the best way to say that, and whether that was best for my children, best for their emotional, mental, even physical health, to follow along as I had done, and as most of us do. And I guess you could say that's the first time I questioned authority, really, or the program that our culture tends to be scripted with. And was really a liberating experience to pull my kids out of school. And it's scary, for sure, in the beginning, and it took some years for me to feel confident in the way I did things. There's always when you're homeschooling, you have your own conscience working on you all the time too, but it really was liberating in realizing that I could do this, and that it didn't have to be done a certain way, the way everybody tells you that it needs to be done. And that the government doesn't always know what's best for me and for my family. So that was a good experience. But as I said, I haven't ever homeschooled them all at the same time. I first started with my son, and it was just him, me and him for a year. And then he went back to school for various reasons that I won't get into. But and then I homeschooled my girls, all of them for a few years, and then until all of them went back to school at about seventh grade. They went back in middle school, and I kind of had that inside of me that I wanted them to be home with me for those younger years, and then almost as a way of preparing them to go out in the world. I saw it as like a little greenhouse. Homeschooling was like having my little seedlings in the greenhouse, strengthening their roots, preparing them for tougher weather outside, outdoors as they went back to school. So that's kind of how it's worked out. Although I did give them the choice every year. It wasn't like, we're going to do this whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
My kids had the choice all the time, and they just always chose to be home every year during elementary school. And then each of them just came to this place of, I'm ready to go to school right about sixth grade, around that time. So it's been interesting how that's worked out. So my two youngest, my twins, are in seventh grade this year. So this is actually the first year that I haven't homeschooled in about 10 years. So that's a little bit different for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
So many questions. I am curious. So you said you studied genealogy, and that was your major. And then were you double major with French, or did you do your?
It was a minor.
You got a minor.
Yeah.
And I did a minor in French too.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, at BYU.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm just curious what year you graduated and what year you were doing all these things.
I graduated in 97. So this was all, I kind of took the extended plan with college, because I kept stopped for study abroad a bit, stopped for a mission, stopped for my internship, it was kind of back and forth. So I was there from 90 to 97.
Wow.
Yeah. How about you?
So I started in 95. So I was there with you towards the end.
Yeah.
So I was just barely starting the French program when you were finishing, but that's really fun. And I did do French study abroad.
Did you?
Yeah. So, but yeah, Jerusalem's amazing too. So I am curious though, genealogy, like what department was that in?
This is part of the history department.
Okay.
It was originally the name was family and community history, and then it became family history and genealogy. So when I first started the major, I was a history major. I thought I was going to be doing family and community history.
Yeah.
And then they ended up changing the major to genealogy while I was about a year after I had declared that. And I initially went, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. In my mind, genealogy was my grandma and my mom sitting at a card table with all kinds of charts and papers and just dry, boring, And so I had a bit of a panic when they changed that major, thinking, no, this is not what I want to do. And I took one of the first required genealogy classes at BYU, and I didn't like it. But long story short, I did take some more classes and got more involved in the research aspect of it, and realized that, oh, this brought together so many of my interests, and I had no idea that genealogy could be so fascinating. So I ended up staying and sticking with the major, and I feel like it was providential, because I wouldn't have chosen it myself if I loved history, always loved history, and social history, community history, things like reading stories about real people, reading original journals, diaries, that sort of thing is always just to be able to get a glimpse of people back in time has always fascinated me. And that's what my major initially was before they turned it into genealogy. So I just didn't know that the two, I was a little ignorant. The two go hand in hand. They fit together perfectly. So, yeah.
Well, that's so beautiful. And I think too, I think that most of us, if we were in school, we wouldn't realize that all those things would fit under that umbrella, right? I'm not saying you're ignorant. I'm saying that I think that well, obviously I didn't even know there was a major. That's so funny. And then I am curious. Okay, so a lot of people over the last 5 to 10 years, but specifically the last 5 years, I think a lot of people have really gotten invested in this idea of learning about their ancestors. And there's been some cool TV shows about it. So, like for somebody that has been feeling inspired to look into their heritage, like what are some go-to resources, like maybe just a couple sites or apps that you would recommend for people if they have questions of how to get started?
Well, definitely. I think most people have heard of ancestry.com. I would say that's probably the number one. I mean, that is my first go-to for
Cool.
sure is ancestry.com. They just have built such a wealth of information there and have partnered with the LDS Church in order to, they both work together, honestly, with their resources. And it's amazing what they've done. So that and the church's resources, familysearch.org, those are both just excellent resources for original records and also for finding research done by other people so that you're not duplicating efforts. There's so much to be found there. So yeah, definitely that's where I would go to start. Interestingly, even though the church is, the premier resource for family history in the world, I went ahead, this is kind of a backtrack, but after I majored in family history, then I went ahead and did the accreditation program so that I could work professionally, and then have worked for clients off and on ever since graduating. But for a time worked for a large genealogy company, and most of our clients were not LDS, which is what I'd say like 99% were not. So this is something that, it's not about your faith or your religion. It's an inherent need that we have at some point in our lives for a lot of people to figure out where we came from and who we're connected to and what their stories are, and they're a part of us. So that was really interesting for me to see. And still, I know the Family History Library in Salt Lake, before they shut down, most of the people using the library even aren't LDS. So that was interesting to find out.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I would just remind everyone that you don't need to be a member of the Latter-day Saint Church to use either of those sites, right? You can just get it. You can, anyways. But that is good to know, because I think that's something that people ask me sometimes, and it's open to all. And so definitely, I'll link to both of those sites in the show notes so that if you want to go check them out. And then, of course, that you can always reach out to Tricia since she does special. Haha. No, that's fun. That's fun. Okay, so obviously, I mean, this is fascinating. These are some things that I didn't know about you, but I think it's interesting how so many of us find a cause, a new direction, or career due to challenges in life. I love how your research led you to bioresonance. And let's dive a little bit more into what it is exactly, how it works, how you help others with this knowledge.
Okay, so as I mentioned, my first love as far as a career is family history, but right now I also am a bioresonance practitioner. There's a whole story behind this. Do you want me to go into that now? Okay, so this goes back to some health issues that my family and I were experiencing some years ago, especially me. Wow. Let's see where to begin with this. I personally had, when I was pregnant with my twins, this was, this was back in late 2007. I suddenly became very sick. I had a very severe lung infection that out of the blue, it was like from one day to the next, I was healthy and everything was going fine. And then I became very, very sick. I, of course, went to the doctor. They gave me lots of antibiotics. It took me a few weeks to get over this. And then shortly after that, I started losing the use of my legs. And my doctor didn't know why. I thought this must be related to pregnancy or pregnancy with twins, but she kind of looked at me with big eyes like, that's not a normal.
How many weeks were you at that point?
This was like, so they were born at 35 weeks, and this was probably 6 weeks before that, maybe a little bit more. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah.
A little scary timing too.
Yeah. So I could stand and walk for a few minutes at a time before my legs would start to feel like they were going to give out on me, like my muscles, or it was a combination of muscles and circulation issues, veins. I wasn't sure, and my doctor wasn't sure, and I didn't. Once my doctor gave me the glazed look, I thought, well, I didn't pursue talking to anybody else about it. And fortunately, that issue did resolve after about a month. And so I just sort of lived with it and didn't walk a lot during that time, and stayed home.
Basically just in time to labor those twins.
Just in time to have those twins. So, the other thing I should mention was I kept, every time I would go in for my appointments, they would do the urine analysis, and they would see that I had strep B bacteria, and they kept giving me antibiotics to try to treat the strep. And that I probably went on 4 rounds of antibiotics prior to this lung infection, and didn't really think anything of it. I had sinus issues for many years prior to this time that I couldn't seem to get on top of. And so antibiotics were just a part of my life, lots of antibiotics over the years. Those sinus issues started about the time of my mission, especially after my mission, and beyond until this time. So my twins, I ended up having a C-section to deliver the twins, which was not what the plan was, but ultimately what the doctor decided to do. And so then I went into major surgery, and now I had IV antibiotics pumped through my system. And fortunately, everything went well. The twins were born, and they were healthy, and I spent time recovering from the C-section. But as I got through that recovery period, I started to notice that I was having a lot of digestive issues. I was constantly nauseated. I started having lots of pain in just all over, but especially in my hips. My tailbone area was excruciatingly painful. I couldn't sit now, where before I couldn't walk. Now sitting for any length of time was extremely painful. So I was usually walking around holding the babies most of the time. And I noticed that I was starting to have food intolerances, things that I couldn't digest. And I began getting sick all the time, sick, one thing after another, whether it was a flu or my tonsils, strep throat, bacterial infections, just, never fully well during this time. And it was a time that my husband was traveling quite a bit for work. He would go sometimes for 2 weeks straight at a time, come home for 2 days, and then leave again for this year after the twins were born. So I had, my oldest was 6, and then the youngest were the infants. And so it was just pretty intense, having no support there, my husband gone. I had actually been living near Seattle when I was pregnant, and then and we had a lot of great friends there who were so excited to support us once the twins were born. But I started having people tell me, you're going to need your family. You need to be near your family. And I thought, I think I'll be fine, but I heard it so often that I thought, I don't want to be stupid. So, I want to set myself up for success here. I know this is kind of crazy to have so many little ones. So my husband looked into getting us transferred with his job back to Utah so that we could have family support. And everything ultimately worked out, but there was something in me that was like, it was like a little voice in my head. You'll be just fine if you stay here in Washington. You have so many people who are excited to step in if you need it. I knew that and felt that, but I I let other people outside of me influence and ignored my heart in the matter. So we moved back to Utah, and then all of the family that I had who had offered to help, and we'd lined up and created a schedule. Each one by one had major events in their life that prevented them from being able to help, and me being able to help them. And so we were all alone in our misery. During that time, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. My sister's husband was deployed. My other sister-in-law had issues with her parents that she needed to take care of. And these were the people that I had set up, to help me during that time. So, it was intense, it was rough, but it was also a time that I learned to rely solely on God for strength, and learned how to pray every moment almost of every day for him to help me through. And so when I look back on it now, I feel peace when I think about that time. As sick as I was, as crazy as it was, there's a peaceful feeling that goes along with that time, just because I was supported by, I'm sure, angels. There were miracles during that time when I had no help in the middle of the night, and prayed for help, that to be able to do the things I needed to do and to take care of these little babies, and had amazing things happen that just increased my testimony that there is a God, that he is there in those moments and times when we desperately need help and there's no one else to help. We're never alone. So I'm grateful for those experiences during that time. I can, it reached kind of a peak with my health, where I got on my knees one day and said, what do I do? I am so sick. I had, been standing in the bathroom one day when in the middle of a bacterial infection. I had a big black sore above my mouth. I can't even to this day tell you what it was. I don't even know. It was black. And I looked in the mirror at myself and I said in my mind, what is happening to me? And I heard a voice, and this is going to be a common theme as we talk today, because we each have ways that we communicate with God, or we receive answers from him. For me, when it's crucial in my life, it's a voice, and I've recognized the voice. I know who it is now. It's happened enough times that I listen, I pay attention when I hear this voice. And I heard a voice that said, your body is very toxic. And I thought, what? I mean, I'm a pretty healthy person, right? I've always been interested in nutrition. I was always, it was always just something I enjoyed, was trying to eat healthy and be healthy. And so to hear that was just puzzling to me, but it stuck in my mind, and it wouldn't make really total sense until many years later. But shortly after that was when I kneeled down and said, what do I do? And how do I get well? Do I go to the doctor? What should I do? And I immediately had the impression the doctor's not going to be able to help you with this. And, that had always been my pattern, was, you go to the doctor. That's not my field. Thank heavens we have doctors, right? Because they learn things we don't have time to learn. I'm a genealogist, they're a doctor, it makes the world go around, right? So that's what I did. And, but in this case, it was, what, they can't help you. And again, I wouldn't understand that even until much later, why that was. But then I opened my scriptures, the Bible, right after that prayer, and it opened right up to Daniel, the book of Daniel, chapter 1, and to the verses about Daniel refusing to eat the king's meat, and how he was guided to eat pulse instead, which is like a mixture of grains, whole grains and seeds. And I knew immediately that I was being told to change my diet, that this was the first thing I needed to do. And I didn't know if this was the only answer. And ultimately I would find out that this was like the first step. There's other things that I would need to do, but it was very clear to me that that's what I was being told, was change your diet. So it took me a couple months. I started looking into different eating ways of eating and re-examining my own diet. I had been told, when I was pregnant with the twins, that I needed to really up my intake of meat and dairy products in order to sustain iron levels, right? And so that was really hard for me. I was never a big meat eater, never a big dairy eater. We grew up, without a lot of dairy in my family. So it was always hard for me to eat dairy. It wasn't something that I liked. But I had tried really hard during my pregnancy to add dairy in and lots of meat, well, more meat. So as I examined this in my mind and comparing it with the book of Daniel, I thought, I have been pretty meat heavy. And it's interesting. I never thought that there's actually health implications with focusing too much on meat. And that's another thing that later I would understand better. But because it's not, anyway, more to say on that. But so I switched my diet and ultimately decided to eliminate all animal products for a time, as I felt that urging to do that and to really focus on fresh foods, natural foods, fruits and vegetables and grains and whole foods. And that's when I also learned about Green Smoothie Girl. So I became a very big green smoothie girl advocate, adding green smoothies into our diet daily, my diet daily. Well, when I made that switch and when I went the distance and cut out the animal products, it was within days that my pain disappeared, which was amazing to me. I couldn't believe it, that something like that, a change like that could heal or remove pain that I'd been experiencing for a year and a half, the pain in my tailbone and the pain in my body. And, that my body had a buildup of things that all of this animal products were getting in the way of digestion and of cleansing. And my body needed a break, really, to be able to clear those things out. So I kept on that journey of diet changes. Although it took the pain away, I still dealt with just not feeling well most of the time, just a feeling of chronic unwellness. I would often just go through my days going, why do I just feel sick? So often I just feel sick. And my digestive issues with food intolerances, even though I eliminated animal products, I still was having a hard time digesting various foods and reacting to lots of foods. And this went on for quite a while. I dabbled in lots of different types of cleanses and dietary changes, avoiding citrus foods, avoiding nightshades, avoiding all grains, avoiding wheat, avoiding, like I took turns with each one of them. And at one point I had avoided and eliminated so many things that I was down to eating like celery and spinach, and trying to make smoothies out of that because I couldn't tolerate anything else, and thinking, is this my life?
Yeah.
Is this what I'm reduced to? Because I can't handle anything else and I don't feel good. And, thank heavens the pain isn't there that I was dealing with. It was immobilizing, but I was still sick. And so I kept going on this path of natural healing, learning all about all kinds of things. There were herbs and oils and learning about our food and how it's produced, was a big eye opener. And that helped me to understand, why maybe animal products weren't good. It's not that meat and dairy aren't inherently good for you or that they're bad for you, but what have we done to the cows and the chickens and that, what are we feeding them? How are they treated? These things became very apparent to me, so that when I finally felt the okay, fast forward to go ahead and add some of these things back into my diet, not overwhelmingly, but a little bit at a time, I understood better to choose very carefully where I get my food, know where my meat comes from, who is the farmer, how is he treating them. I got my own chickens so that I could feed my own chickens, make sure they're not medicated, so that their eggs would be clean. I never tolerated eggs well until I had my own chickens and realized, It's because they're full of medication and they're fed the wrong foods. And those foods, you can't help but, you eat what they eat. You're putting that in your body too. And that was a part of why my body couldn't heal while I was feeding it with foods that were filled with toxins, basically. So this was a big, long journey for me of healing and understanding the body. And, initially I thought, I have enough faith. I am going to pray to be healed, like, like that, early on in this journey of being sick. And the answer I got was, this is going to be a journey for you. This is going to be, just have some patience. And at the time it felt, there were so many moments during those years of desperation, of feeling like I couldn't go on another day, right? Because I'm not well, and I have all these kids, and how am I going to do this, but I look back now and see how I was sustained every step of the way. And it was this journey, and there were moments of desperation, but then I would somehow be given the strength to pick myself up, to do it again. He'd give me this just enough strength to do what I needed to do in teaching, raising, taking care of my family, my home, so that on the outside, I don't, nobody would know that I was dealing with chronic illness all those years, because it wasn't apparent. I was able to, move around, function, whatever, but there was just always this feeling of, I am not well. I do not feel well, through it all. But I can look back now on it and see the beauty of going through the journey rather than having a single event with healing, and how it's allowed me to understand the body, to understand nature, to understand what God's provided for health and healing, to see the process of how healing takes place, and ultimately to be able to understand other people and what they're going through, so that hopefully I can offer them something from my own experience, where if it had been an event of healing, I wouldn't have any of that knowledge at all, none of that knowledge. And so all of that ultimately led me to bioresonance scanning, was kind of the background. Part of my, I guess, journey was doing a lot of training and studying in energy work, understanding the energy systems of the body. I think energy work, quote unquote, can, get a bad name, especially within the LDS church. I think there's a lot of fear surrounding it, of tapping into a power that is outside of what we're used to. But there's so much, you can't really confine energy work to a single method or approach. It's a very vast, broad range of knowledge, falls within the quantum physics field. Very fascinating to me. And that particular period of training for me brought me was an understanding of the emotional aspect of healing, how that affects our health. And I could see in myself where I was more vulnerable to things because of emotional issues that I had buried inside. And, this is all a part of our health and all of a part of our healing. But it was that training also that made it so that when I learned about bioresonance scanning, it was very normal, very natural to me, because I already knew that energy was underneath it all. That being able to shift energy, whether it be through a device or even through our own intention, is powerful. And so bioresonance was like the culmination of all this training. It was all of the nutritional background and the natural supplement type background, and the I dabbled a bit in homeopathy, and it's in there too. And then the energy, the emotional aspect is also brought up in bioresonance scanning. So all of it was combined. And immediately when I was introduced to it, I went, that is it. That is what I need to do right now. I had been feeling like I needed to ultimately have a business to help people. I didn't want to have a business to help people. I prefer to do it for free, but that you get into problems, especially with time and wearing yourself out, and people not taking it seriously or not, so I kept having this nudge that you need to do it as a business, or else people won't, they won't come for help, especially women, because there's the guilt aspect if you just constantly do it for free. And I had been doing it for free, not bioresonance, but some other, just helping people for free. And I could see finally that, okay, I guess I need to, but what am I going to do? How am I going to specialize? What am I going to do? And this just felt so natural to start in this. But there's more. Do you have any questions at this point before I just keep on talking?
Oh, it's been great. I did have some questions, but it's okay. Keep going because now my brain is gone. I'm just like, I'm right with you.
Yeah. So one of the things that bioresonance, one of the major awarenesses that bioresonance brought to me pretty quickly was, so bioresonance scanning is a way of measuring imbalances in the body using energy resonance. So if you think about something like an MRI, they're using energy to detect imbalances in the body. It's very similar type of technology. It's a field of study that's been around for decades. The major universities have been studying it for a very long time in bioenergetics and quantum physics. These devices, like the one I use, have been around also for a long time, but they're not mainstream, mostly because the FDA keeps them under wraps, so that they're not able to be used as just mainstream medical devices. The one that I use is a class 2 medical device. It's very limited. It's mostly used by holistic doctors, naturopaths, veterinarians, kind of in the natural alternative health field. Chiropractors, often use bioresonance as well. If you think about Albert Einstein and E=mc², what he's saying is all matter is really energy. If you get down beneath the atom, it's vibration rates. Yeah. And so that's the basis, the foundation for bioresonance work, is that everything's vibrating at a certain rate, and that our body is communicating on that level. Like at the very foundation, the body communicates through energy. The cells are communicating through energy to each other. And so if we can harness this and communicate with the body and ask the body what is going on and have the body tell us what it needs on its own communication level of energy, then we have something very specific for people, rather than guesswork, or rather than, blanket, solutions that don't actually work for everybody, because everybody's so unique. If we can tap into that, it can be really powerful. So the process is sending energy signatures. Everything's vibrating at a very specific rate, unique to it. This desk is vibrating at a certain rate that's unique to it. Certain organs, when it comes to the body, organs and blood and viruses, bacteria, fungus, those all have specific vibration rates. So if you can identify the vibration rate and then catalog it, then you can know, you can identify what's going on in the body. So the bioresonance, the scanner, sends in 60, in my case with my device, 60,000 different energy signatures to see what resonates in your body. And that's how we can tell what's going on. It's not meant to be diagnostic. We're actually prohibited from being diagnostic by the FDA. But we can certainly point out what is going on in your body at any given time, in any organ of the body systems. It can also test for, as I mentioned, emotions, to see which emotions are causing problems, so that you can be aware, focus on them, address them, so they don't hinder your health. You can test for things like what type of diet and exercise is best for me? What's getting in the way of my sleep? There's all kinds of things. There are, ways to test for allergies and food sensitivities. There are ways to identify toxins that are overloading the body so that they can be detoxed. Very specific. And the one thing we know about bioresonance, if you Google bioresonance, if you use Google, you'll initially, the first hits will come up with quack reports that bioresonance is some form of quackery, which I find amusing and unfortunate, because it is a field of study that has been proven over and over again. My particular device, there has been a major university study done by the University of Utah comparing the bioresonance reports and scans with blood tests, and over a 2-year period, and it came out as 99% accurate over that time. So we know that the scanner is accurate. What it is showing up is accurate. And I, as a practitioner, over the last 4 years, have proven it over and over and over and over and over again with each of my clients that it is accurate with things that they know, and that it also brings up many things that we're not aware of because it's getting down to the cellular level. It's bringing up things that haven't even surfaced with physical symptoms yet. So it's, you know, a way of preventative health measure as well. But okay, so that's the background with bioresonance. It's a way of testing. It's also a way of treating energetically, communicating with the body on its level to shift it towards balance, to remove blockages so that the body can heal itself. That's a big purpose of bioresonance as well. It combines homeopathy, which is also a way of treating the body with energy resonance. But that's the background. As I got started, something became very apparent to me, as this is a very specific, very accurate, you know, as I became very confident that it was accurate, I was paying more attention to what was the common denominator with most of my clients that were coming in with health issues. Usually people come to me because they have a health issue that their doctor can't seem to address. You know, that's usually often why people turn to natural health, is because they have something that can't seem to be resolved through standard medical practices or paradigms. And so these clients come to me with these chronic health issues. And as I started to pay attention to it after the first year and was looking back over scans, I realized, you know, I keep seeing vaccine toxicity in almost every single person who comes in here. Vaccine toxins in every organ that you can think of, especially the brain, the liver, the kidneys, the intestines, the stomach, I mean, the blood, just everywhere. And I hadn't really paid attention to it in the beginning until it became like I couldn't ignore it anymore. Vaccine toxins, and then heavy metal toxins, another one that just was showing up over and over and over again. And I, at one point, thought, I'm going to go look back on my very first scans when I went to see a bioresonance practitioner for the first time. And I had printed out all those reports and had kept them. And I was looking over it, and sure enough, my main scan, my very first priority scan, there was vaccine issues. And it was one of these moments of just kind of mind blown. Like, I think I'm onto something here. And so to back up with that a little bit, I had already, you know, before getting into bioresonance scanning and during the time that I was going through this process of natural healing and learning about the body, I had stopped vaccinating my kids. I had one of my twins, when she was an infant, about 6 months, gosh, I'm trying to remember if it was 6 months or 9 months old, she started having seizures. And it happened, there were a couple of different episodes over a few month period where I walked in on her having seizures in her crib, and it was a frightening experience. I wasn't sure what was going on at first. But the second time that it happened, it was pretty terrifying to see your baby seizing, and you know, the look on their face and their eyes, and you know, just frightening. And the second time this happened, I said, like, it's like a communication with God is the best way I can talk about it. It wasn't a formal prayer. It was just me talking to him saying, what is happening to her? And as soon as I said that, I heard that voice, and it said, do not continue to vaccinate her. And that was shocking to me. Honestly, I never would have thought that that was related to a vaccine. And in that moment, I thought, oh, well, yeah, she had her vaccines. It had been like 4 days since her vaccines. If I hadn't heard that.
So she was about what, 18 months?
She was the first time, I want to say, was like 9 months. And then this was like her 12th month.
Her 12-month checkup, which is big. I don't remember how many you get, but it's a big one.
Yeah. And it's those triple combination vaccines. They usually get the MMR, they usually get the DTaP again, and they've had 3 other DTaPs at that point, right? So yeah, it was after that 12-month visit that I saw this happen. So that voice, if I hadn't heard that, I would have never connected it to, even though it had happened, the vaccines had happened a few days before. I wouldn't have. And my mind went back to the other episode, and I realized that was also shortly after her vaccines. And so of course I'm stunned, absolutely stunned inside, because I had always been very diligent with vaccines, like most people. It's just what you do. And from the time you're little and you're going to get your own shots, and your mom who you trust completely is telling you this is what we do, right? So that you don't get diseases. And we're so grateful. And this is a miracle, and it saved the world. And, all these things that we hear, and we trust and we believe without question, because the people we love, the people we trust, are telling us that it's so. And not knowing that they have also been told that it's so over and over for generations. And it just seems we also hear stories, right, of how devastating polio was, and we're so grateful for the vaccine, and measles, and what would it be like if measles was still around, and smallpox, right? Smallpox was the biggest miracle of all. You hear these stories, and sometimes you learn about them in school, but usually it's just stories that are passed around as you just within our culture. And so I was just like everybody else, and had no reason not to believe that this was true, and that these were good and part of the miracle of modern medicine. So that was shocking to me. And then to have it be, who I know is God telling me not to vaccinate anymore. Of course I wasn't going to. He's telling me, even though I didn't understand it at the time, I made up my mind in that moment, I'm not going to vaccinate her anymore. And I thought, it's just her. Initially, I thought it was just her. And but this started me, before I stopped, I thought I need to understand, number one, about polio.
Yeah.
Because that's the one that, everybody goes back to. But what about polio? So that was my first question, and I immediately started doing research. And at this time, it wasn't too hard to find information about polio. And what I found in actually looking at the actual stats was not at all what I'd been told, and that was pretty mind-blowing as well. That polio had declined by 98% before the vaccine was ever introduced. I couldn't believe that. And then that polio declined all over the world at that same rate, even though they didn't have vaccines. In other parts of the world, and even countries who never did have a vaccine at all, polio did not resurge. It didn't come back without a vaccine. So, that's where I started first digging into it. I did enough research to feel confident that if I stopped vaccinating my daughter, that she would be okay, that I wasn't going to put her life in danger. I just needed to understand. And I think it's wise to understand, even if you get a message from heaven, that you need to understand, why is he telling you that, So I felt confident in stopping with her. And then it only took another year or so before I stopped. Just realized in all of my research and understanding about the body, it did not make sense to me to be injecting, what we know are in vaccines into my children and calling that help. It just didn't make sense as I began to just learn more and more about what true help really is. So I stopped all of them. And I just felt like, this is just my decision for my family. It's, it's just not what I want to do. And I feel comfortable not doing it, but I just keep it to myself. Right. This is not something, it was becoming clear to me that this is not something that you can readily talk about and have people welcome what you're sharing. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. And that's what I did. I had a friend, some years later, who I somehow in conversation, it came up that she didn't vaccinate her kids and that she had never been vaccinated. And, and we immediately sort of connected over that. And she said, oh, I'm part of this great Facebook group. You should join it. It's a bunch of mothers who have connected vaccines to their children's health issues. And we just share our research and information, and it's a support group. And I was like inside going, I don't really need that. I don't want to even be part of any of that. Like, I don't need it. I don't want to debate it. I don't really, it's not important to me. I had never been, there's this sort of cliche statement that anti-vaxxers are just followers of Andy Wakefield and what's her name, who has the autistic son, who's been in the media in past years. What's her name?
Is she the one that was killed?
No.
Jenny
right.
McCarthy.
Jenny McCarthy.
Sorry,
yeah.
there's so many of us.
Yeah.
Right?
So people would bring those names up and I'd be like, who's that? Like, it was never part of my decision, the whole autism issue and then Jenny McCarthy. I mean, I still barely know anything about her. I did ultimately investigate the autism issue, which is another story, and Andy Wakefield, which is unfortunate that he's been smeared quite,
I just
so
love
extensively.
him so much.
I do too.
I think he's so great.
He's amazing. So it's unfortunate that people listen to media and don't investigate any further. But this whole journey for me was a process of realizing that just trusting media and trusting authorities doesn't necessarily bring the truth. And so I've questioned. I'm a questioner ever since then. So this was my backdrop as far as vaccines went. And as I started doing bioresonance scanning and I saw the vaccines coming up so often over that first year, I would only just touch on it with the clients. I'd say, oh, so we've got some vaccine toxins here. And yeah, sometimes vaccines leave toxins. And, I just sort of gently bring up the subject, but I would back away then because I don't want to get involved, right? Yeah. I don't want to, this is a very personal decision. This isn't something that I just don't want to be a part of it, right? So that's what I would do initially until it became very clear to me that this is a real problem for most people. And the way that the bioresonance works, it shows me two different scales of whether something is stressing or weakening the body and how much, to what degree. And those were always very high, on both levels, very, very much stressing or weakening the body, very much a physical issue causing physical problems for the people. And they would be in the organs that they were complaining about, like the thyroid or their skin or their brain or their intestines, and so this was becoming very clear. And I, one day, just felt very humbled by it. I knew that this was a problem now. I could see that much of the chronic illness that we deal with now today is likely, and if you believe in the accuracy of bioresonance, it's definitely connected, triggered by vaccines. And I determined at that time that I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I had to bring this up. I had to let people know that this is likely a factor in your chronic illness, and then take steps to remedy it. So I came up with a specific vaccine detox scan, a specific heavy metal scan. We're able to create our own scans using the library of energy signatures. And so I went in and just did it myself. But, to now do a little more backtracking, my kids, when they were little and I was vaccinating them, they had all of the gamut of health issues that a child goes through that has now become normal, although it shouldn't be normal. I had a daughter who struggled with, first of all, colic. She screamed for the first 3 months of her life nonstop. I mean, that was something else. And, the doctor says, oh, it's their tummy, right? It's their tummy, and or we don't know. She then dealt with eczema and ear infections. And so there were antibiotics in our house for her, little pink Barbie medicine, we called it, right? And then my son, he never slept as an infant more than 10 minutes at a time. I could never understand it. And so I would just call him, well, he's just just wired differently, right? And just, you come up with these excuses because we have no reason. We don't know why our children are dealing with these things, and the doctors don't even know why most of the time. It's just common childhood illnesses or common childhood chronic health issues that we now mostly face. My son also, after his MMR, he got the measles, he got the mumps within a couple weeks of each other. And I just rolled with it. I just was like, it never caused me to question anything. I just, okay, he's got the measles. Okay. Now we have the mumps. Okay, well, I guess he's just one of the unlucky ones, which, is true. Very few people do get that from the vaccine, but some people do. So we rolled with that. But shortly after that time period, he had been very advanced as a baby, and a 1-year-old. At 1 year old, he was singing the alphabet and, talking and very verbal. And after he got those shots, he regressed a bit. He stopped singing the alphabet. He stopped talking as much. He started to curl his hands up, like in this little fist, this little ball, and just different issues that, again, I just rolled with, just like, well, okay. And he started developing food allergies and intolerances, and then ultimately later developed neurological issues, some tics and night terrors and anxiety, panic attacks, lots of things like this that everybody's got their issues, right? I mean, these days when moms get together, it's a discussion of the various health issues that their children have. Where when I was growing up, I remember being sick 3 times growing up. And I don't know about you, but this was just actually a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking about it, and I thought, I remember being sick in kindergarten. It was the first week of kindergarten, and I got sick. And then when's the next time I remember? The next time I remember, it was 7th grade. It was like fall in 7th grade, and I got sick. It was like strep throat or something. And then the last time I remember getting sick was my senior year. I had a fever. Well, those first 2 times I got sick, I realized a couple of weeks ago, one of them was right after my kindergarten shots, and one of them was right after my middle school shots that I got sick, that's very interesting. So, but other than that, people weren't out of school so often, and we weren't always talking about our, friends weren't talking about their health issues or missing school, or not when I was little anyway. But it's interesting that is such a thing now, is all the various health issues that people are dealing with. So, Abby with her colic, her eczema, her ear infections, Luke with his neurological issues, his food intolerances, his getting the measles and the mumps and things. And then I had my 3rd daughter, who was just, the best way to describe her is sickly when she was little, just sickly. Just, there's not a picture of her when she was little that wasn't puffy face and red eyes and congestion, snotty nose, and, always unhappy. And we just thought, well, that's just how she is, right? And then to have one of my twins develop seizures. So, it was the seizures that I connected to the vaccines, thank heavens, literally. But it was later, after I realized the problem with my clients and the vaccine toxicity and the heavy metals, and me feeling really humbled by that, I said a prayer. I said, I am so sorry for not speaking up when I've seen this. And I promise I'm not holding back anymore, because that's unfair to them. And it was a tearful prayer, thinking of all the suffering that's going on and that's not being connected. And people are unaware and continue to submit themselves to this and perpetuate their chronic illnesses. And it just broke my heart. And I had this impression of the whole world suffering because of this, and not being allowed even to connect the dots, because it's constantly, you don't know what you're, no, you didn't see that. No, that's not what it is. No, that could never be it. No, that's always what we're told. So it was when I finished that prayer, and it was like I laid my belief system and my resistance on the altar, is what I did in that moment. Like, I'm done holding on to any resistance about this, or any old beliefs, or any of it. And it was after that as I finished that prayer, that I had like a movie in my mind. It was like almost an old time movie of flipping images in my mind, showing me how each of my children's health issues when they were little were triggered by vaccines. And I was, again, just dumbfounded that even after choosing not to vaccinate, even after my whole long journey, all those years studying, health, and even doing some vaccine research for a couple of years, I never connected it even with my own children, not even with them. And then it was shortly after that I asked, what happened to me? Because I had always thought it was the antibiotics, which I'm sure played a role in weakening my immune system. But what it did was make me ultimately very vulnerable to further toxins. But I had just made that assumption that my health issues were caused by antibiotics. I had often said that to family members, kind of as a warning, like, just be careful, right, with antibiotics. And I had gotten rid of those in my life and had believed that that's what it was. But this one day I just said, what happened to me? Because I had had those health issues that led me into that journey, but then ultimately ended up with a more serious health issue that finally needed to be resolved. And it was the bioresonance scanning that helped me to resolve a more serious, I see it as the culmination of everything really, that had been just about 5 years ago that I was dealing with it was a cyst that was causing me a lot of problems, very serious problems. And that's how I was introduced to bioresonance, was through that process. But so asking this question, the moment I asked the question, I was shown a image of the doctor or a nurse giving me 2 vaccines when I was pregnant with my twins. And I had completely forgotten that I'd ever received those vaccines until that moment when I was shown that.
Which ones did you get?
So this was the flu shot and the DTaP.
Oh my gosh.
Which is, I think that this was 2007. I think this was really the beginning of them coercing pregnant women to receive the DTaP. Prior to that time, I don't remember ever being offered it or asked about it. I would have taken it if they'd said it, because I was all about whatever I need to do. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, shoot me up, I'm using the wrong
You're
words.
totally fine. No, you're totally fine. In fact, here, do you mind if I?
Yeah.
So the big one that I'm worried about is the one that we're all facing right now, that we're being coerced. So I feel like, okay, there's so many things. First of all, as you've been listening to Tricia's story today, I just want to remind us all to, again, listen to our heart, because look at Tricia's journey, listen to her heart, and look at the beautiful knowledge that has come. And then it didn't just come easily. She had to continue to research and continue to follow her heart and all of these things. So again, there's so many things I want to say. And I will just mention that I think you're right, Tricia. Most of us just grew up going and getting all these things. It was kind of like being part of a computer, and every year you have to get a new update, right? And that's just what we did as moms. And if we were good moms, we took our kids in to their well check and they got whatever was the latest update, right? And so I think there's there's so many things I would say. One thing that I would mention though is that many of you know, maybe I haven't been very specific on here, but my kids have never received any vaccines, okay? But I did. And I am severely damaged by a lot of these things. In fact, I think that I started realizing that things were going to be coming into my health because of going to my natural doctor, who was basically, I think she was doing a type of bioresonance. And so I kind of had a little, heads up, but my kids have still had a lot of reactions to things. And this is my opinion, and I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to pause this. Okay, so a little bit about my kids. So we never vaccinated any of them. And yet I have a son who started having febrile seizures when he was 3. He had just started preschool. We were doing a little co-op and he started having seizures. So it's interesting because the reason why I bring this up, my kids have had plenty of health issues, a lot of allergies, We attributed it a lot to me, just thinking that I passed on bad genes. But the reason why I bring this up is I think that at some point, we as mothers, in our effort to do the best that we could for our children, we will come to realize that we've made some mistakes, and some of them not of our own. We didn't intend to make these choices. They were just things that everyone was doing. So if you have any guilt whatsoever, I want you to say that you're not alone. We've all felt guilty at some point for choices that we've made with our children. But I would also say that I have felt guilty, and I didn't even vaccinate my children, and yet they have a lot of issues as well. So the reason why I bring it up, though, is because I believe that all of my vaccines have now injured my children, because ultimately I believe that it has not only damaged my DNA, but my husband and I's DNA combined then gave them damaged DNA. And that's why they have issues as well. So and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Tricia, but when I was going to my health practitioner, ZD, and she was doing a lot of similar things that you've been doing, she basically taught me about gene mutation. And she said that what the biggest problem, you can have gene mutations for a lot of things. A lot of times it can be caused because of chemicals. It can be caused from vaccines. It can be caused from other procedures that we have done to our bodies, or maybe it's things that we're eating. There's lots of possibilities, and you've covered some of these. But what she taught me is that you have these gene mutations on your DNA strand. And what happens is a lot of times they remain dormant. And I think that's why when you talked about the bioresonance and how you could see things coming even before they had materialized, I think what ZD taught me, and I would love to hear what you think about this, she said they remain off until something triggers them. Once that gene mutation is triggered, it is now on. And then you have to deal with the ramifications of what that mutation does. And so there were things that she suggested. She said there are several things that can cause a mutation to turn on. One is hormones. That made me think about your pregnancy with the twins, because you are already having so many more hormones than a typical pregnancy, and you already have a lot of hormones during pregnancy, right? And so that kind of made sense to me. The other thing she said that can happen, obviously, when teenagers start to go through puberty, that triggers hormones, which also triggers the change in the mutations, or just to get them to go on. And then she said trauma can cause the mutations to be turned on. And then what was another one? I think just really evasive procedures, or, overwhelming of chemicals, whether it's in the air, in the food, all these things can trigger that. So I am kind of curious what you think about those, but also I just wanted to remind us all that, unfortunately, this life experience that we have, I tried. I did not vaccinate any of my children, and yet they have had health issues, right? Maybe not to the extent that some children have, but it is terribly unfortunate. And I totally agree with you that when we were little, it was rare for people to have health problems, whereas now it's a part of life. It's just, like you say, it's a cultural thing. Everyone just sits around and talks about the latest disease they have. Whereas before that was a rarity, right? So, okay, so I am curious, like, what do you think about my practitioner's thoughts on the whole mutations thing? Any thoughts on, I'm totally throwing out the spot here.
Yeah, well, it made me think of epigenetics, which is basically gene mutation from emotional trauma in the past, right?
Yes.
Which is becoming more and more talked of. There are studies now that are showing that this is indeed a thing, these mutations that come. So yes, I agree with that. And that is something that Bioresonance does bring up as well, is something called miasms, which are inherited vulnerabilities. And my training in energy work taught me that a lot of these miasms, these vulnerabilities that manifest physically, initially began with emotional trauma in the past that caused physical problems in an ancestor and weren't resolved in their lifetime and remained a part of the DNA, passed down through generations. And then, yeah, it takes, we all, as you said, I too believe and have learned that we carry many, many different mutations in the body that it just requires the perfect storm, so I would agree with that. And both the experience with studying energy systems and also bioresonance have shown that to be true. And I also would agree that it's, in spite of my story, it's not just vaccines making people sick. What I have learned through this client work and through my own healing is that illness is usually the result of a toxicity or a deficiency or a combination of both. So in my case with my family, we were pretty careful as far as a toxic lifestyle with so many other things. It makes sense that the predominant toxin in our lives was the injections that we received. And I think that's probably the most pernicious and widespread source of concentrated toxins that our children receive, and people, even adults. In my case, it was, as you said, I was set up perhaps to fail when I received those 2 shots when I was pregnant because of the antibiotics, because of some emotional buried issues that made my body a little more vulnerable, a little more weak, because of the hormones, because the body, especially when you're pregnant with twins, already the immune system is on high alert. You have all these things in place so that when I received those, it just tipped me over the edge. It was the trigger, but there were other things in play there for sure. So I think there's a combination, and in the world we live in, it's coming in the water, it's coming in the air, it's coming in the food. Any of those, if you have enough accumulation, can trigger inherited weaknesses or weaken the body enough that you develop, chronic health issues. So my thoughts on the jabs is just that it's the most widespread, it's the most common way, and that's what I see in the scans too. It's the most common trigger, but it's not the only one for sure. And there are other factors at play that make someone more vulnerable than another, which is why, one person reacts and another one doesn't, which also leads into why we should never mandate a health procedure or a drug or anything of that sort, because our bodies are so different. Our inherited weaknesses are so different. Our circumstances, situations, our toxic load is so different from person to person. And it's not always like you often hear people say, well, this person, died because of underlying health issues, or this person they didn't have any underlying health issues. Well, a lot of underlying health issues you can't see on the outside. Someone can appear to be perfectly healthy and think they're perfectly healthy, but have these vulnerabilities that have built up over time that just need that trigger to put into play. So yeah, and I would agree too that no shame, no guilt. I actually don't feel shame or guilt when I look back on my decisions. I feel like you know better, you do better. I am grateful that fortunately my children, their issues were not serious enough that I could not heal them through natural means. Very grateful for that. So it took a few years of diet changes, detoxing, being careful for them, but all of their health issues resolved. And it's been probably, I don't know, many, many years of very good health. We do not have, my children no longer have any chronic health issues, and it's been a long time. We haven't seen a doctor for illness since we stopped the shots. And that was 12 years ago. So there's been no medications, no antibiotics, no doctor visits, no therapies, no nothing in our home since then, which I'm very grateful for. But they often come home, and they'll tell me stories of their friends. Oh yeah, they, all their health issues with their skin, their gut, their eyes, their brain, their headaches, their allergies, their asthma, their diabetes, all of their friends have chronic health issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis. And my kids are like, man, we have nothing, so I'm so grateful for that and for tools to resolve those issues in many cases. And in our case, what a blessing that is. And for all that we learned because of it. And it's very empowering to learn how to heal through other means and realize that you have that capability, that you're not dependent on an outside authority for health. That has been a very empowering thing for us and for my children too. They don't fear illness. because they've been raised knowing that there are things that we can do at home and ways to treat our body and take care of it that resolve things fairly quickly. And what an amazing thing that is. So I don't feel bad because it put me on a path of empowerment, of asking questions, seeking answers, and realizing that the realm of knowledge is vast. It is not confined into a little box of one perspective in the Western world. There's so much to be learned, and I'm sure I've only scratched the surface, but it's just, it's just made me want to just keep on asking and keep on learning and keep on going, rather than confine myself to a certain belief system.
That's so good. Thank you. That was so good. And I love that you brought up the whole empowerment part too, because it's true. A lot of times these challenges are given to us so that we can go seek out more knowledge and so that we can better ourselves and help others along the way. I love that you've had the opportunity to help so many people along the way. We've mentioned our dear friend Colleen quite a few times, but whenever I talk to Colleen, I get the same feeling, that she doesn't feel downtrodden by this, but she feels empowered. And I love that, there's things that I've learned because of knowing Colleen. There's choices that I make because of friends that have made these choices. And it's interesting because sometimes you're looking for the next thing, but you don't know who, and then this person walks into your life and they have the missing piece, or they have the direction that I need to go to continue to keep learning. And I love that. So as we've kind of gone through this past year, things have gotten very noisy. The censorship has been incredibly brutal. So I would love to have you just touch on anything to do with the censorship, and specifically the transition from just being routine shots that we're getting to now getting this major jab that we're seeing.
So the censorship is interesting. I fortunately had my awakening with my clients a few years ago, and it was actually about 2 years ago, which gave me enough time to really dig in much, much deeper into vaccine history, vaccine research, vaccine studies than I had before, which was very eye-opening, just added to the knowledge that I had before. And I, started filing things. As a researcher, because that is my initial passion is research, and because of the stringent, requirements as a history major and genealogy major, I value primary sources above all. And so my research, even from the beginning, when I very first questioned polio, I was not interested in anything that wasn't a primary source at the time. And so that was my focus, and that's where I got my information. Same thing a couple of years ago when I really dug in. I still wasn't aware of the usual, anti-vax type material that people cite often, because I was really buried in studies. I was on PubMed, and I was, reading actual medical literature from the 19th century with smallpox, and, following the graphs and charts from the CDC and looking at percentages and looking at, these were the things that I wanted. I crave the truth. I am a truth seeker, a truth lover. That is probably the biggest passion of my life, is seeking truth. And so I would start to file these things that I felt were legitimate for each of the categories that I was studying. And one of the things I did, which is interesting, is I made a list of links to interviews with medical doctors and nurses and scientists who were speaking up about what they had learned about the risks, about the jabs. And I had over 100 links on this file that I had created for these videos so that I could pull them up when I needed to. And I went back about 6 months ago to gather some for a friend who was asking some questions. And I went in to click on one of them, and oop, the link was broken. I went in another one, oop, that's broken. I went in every single one but 2 6 months ago of the links were broken, saying they no longer exist on the internet. And there, I had looked at them probably 9 months prior, and most of them had been still there. So I knew, based on what was coming out in the media, that there was going to be a real crackdown on jab information online, but to see that in my own files, my own links, that I can no longer access some of this primary source material was pretty frightening to verify that that's really what's going on. So I've seen that happen just in the past year, a real ruthless crackdown in taking away anything that does not support the mainstream narrative that we hear. Interestingly, as far as this current situation with the new jab, the Covax, I had, just gone through this period of a lot of research, and also had those spiritual experiences, related to my past, and so it was very much kind of a conversation I was having already with, I would say, God, about why and what's the truth and what does he want me to do about this. And so this kind of two-way thing was going on already. But the summer of 2019, I was working one day at my desk and thinking about a trip overseas that I had been wanting to do for many years. I had wanted to take my family over to India to do some volunteer work and just to explore India. And this was something I thought about, and for a very long time, always it was something that was going to be in the future, but as my kids got older and life got busy, I was starting to feel like it's just not going to happen. I don't know. I don't see how we're going to make that happen. But so I kind of had shelved it. But this one day, sitting at my desk, I suddenly had that thought and desire to go again, thinking, gosh, it'd be great if we could just pull that off. And as I was thinking about it, here comes that voice again. And the voice came and said, go now. And with that was the communication that everything was going to change very shortly, that we would not be able to travel without a jab in the very near future. And I sat there at my desk going, whoa. I mean, I saw it in my mind. I didn't know what the circumstances would be. That's what puzzled me. I was like, how is that going to happen? How is that going to happen so soon that I'm being told, go now? I couldn't see the future, but it was just this urging, like, this is the time, do it now. It's not going to be the same after this. And there's going to be a jab and you do not want to take it, was the feeling that was with that voice. So we did, from that day on, I planned this trip and we went overseas and for a month and went to India and stopped in Turkey and ended up in Israel. And it was amazing, an amazing experience. And then several months later was when the whole world shut down.
So was this the summer of 19?
Summer of 2019, July. And we went in October, the beginning of October, on that trip, came back in November, and then it was February or January when we first.
Yeah, I think that we heard about some initial stuff in China, but it didn't come here until after the first of the year. Yeah. At least that we know of.
Right.
Wow.
So a couple months later. So I went into, as soon as that was announced and became a thing with the media and everything was shut down, I knew already there was a new jab on the way, right? And of course that quickly became apparent. And I had shared this with my family prior to our trip, because I told them the experience I had. You guys, I'm like, this is so interesting, but I just had this really strong impression that we need to go now because everything's going to change in the world and there's going to be a jab and we don't want it. So my family knew, but that's the only people I'd told by the time this all came about. So very interesting going into this situation with that knowledge, knowing that it's coming and watching everything work towards that with the narrative and the media. And that, it's been gradual. I think if you had told people this, that they needed this in the beginning, you know, people would resist it. It's been this gradual, like, oh gosh, just shifting of our minds towards accepting that this is a good thing and that it needs to be mandated and that it's the only answer to this problem. And, you know, almost like it wasn't created to help us with the virus, but the virus was created so that we would take the jab.
You know, totally. Yeah, I totally agree. It's so funny because yeah, when things started happening, that was the conversation that was happening here. And then soon I realized there were a few others that we were having these thoughts, and then it wasn't feeling quite so crazy, right? Because you're realizing that several of us were starting to see the game plan very easily, right? And so, of course, when friends started sending me the green passports and all the, you know, the shot passports, I was not surprised. You were not surprised. Many of us were not surprised. So, okay, so what do we do at this point? We have so many of us that are listening that are wondering, I have more questions. What should I do? Where should I go? So what would be your top 3 places that you would recommend that they go ahead and start researching? Because we know that you are a queen of research and that you enjoy going straight to the direct sources. So what are some places that you would recommend, and how would you recommend that people get started?
Well, it depends on if it's with the current jab or just in general. For me, one of my favorite sources for research has been learntherisk.org, which was created by a woman named Brandy Vaughn, who used to work for the pharmaceutical industry. I think it was Merck, maybe, that she worked for. And she became a whistleblower, and when she uncovered the amount of deception and fraud that was going on with jabs in the industry. And she has been very, very vocal for the past few years, and then mysteriously passed away last December. I think she's in her 30s, maybe her early 40s, which was tragic, and of course raises lots of questions about why somebody healthy would suddenly pass away, somebody who was very, very vocal about the issues and concerns with not only this new jab, but ones in the past. So she, over the years, created a website where she gathered primary sources related to injections, and that has been a great source for me. And if you're interested in primary source research, that's a good one. Another person that I would say was very helpful in my research is Dr. Suzanne Humphries. She wrote the book Dissolving Illusions, and she is a nephrologist, a board certified medical doctor specializing in kidney health. And she, after I don't know how many years of her career, finally put together that a good majority of her patients coming in with acute kidney issues were triggered by jabs. And this was very shocking for her as well to put that together, because she had always been very, you know, as any doctor, pro injection. And but she basically faced the fact, took a look at her education, and realized that she had simply been repeating what she had been told. She had never actually done any research herself, and that most, if you know, the vast majority of medical doctors and nurses do not do their own research. They receive about a half a day of training in medical school. They're told what to give and when to give it, and that's about the extent of it, and how to encourage hesitant parents to receive them in, you know, more or less words. So she faced that fact in herself, humbled herself, I guess she would say, and decided to leave her practice to devote her time to researching injections, beginning with smallpox. And her research is invaluable. She wrote this book called Dissolving Illusions, and starts with smallpox and goes through over time. And it's fully documented in primary sources, the true history of each of these jabs that we receive for the various illnesses over time. So that one is a very good resource. She also has many videos on YouTube of lectures that she's given. And then there is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., He's well known as an environmentalist, but he also has become aware as a trial lawyer and as a very high profile industry lawyer of the corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. And he has also devoted much of his life in recent years to researching facts related to injections and speaking out about that in spite of his overwhelmingly I don't know what you would say, his career as an environmentalist. But it kind of ties into, because he's all about toxins in the environment, and now he's realized it's not just the environment, this is also what we're putting into our bodies, and sounding the alarm. And he's very, very, very passionate about the subject and has gathered much information. He's very careful as a lawyer about what he presents to the public to make sure that it's factual. So I would recommend his site, either following him or his organization called Children's Health Defense. They have a website that you can go to for resources, and also a Facebook page that you can follow where he regularly updates, or on Instagram. He often, risks being censored, like most of them, which ought to tell us something, really, if you really allow yourself to think. There's quite the narrative going on right now that we can only trust experts, and it's really a push away from trusting your own intuition. We each have the ability to reason and sense what is true or not, to guide us in our research. We also have, if you are a person of faith, we have prayer to guide us in our research. And that has been the guiding force for me with the amount of material that's out there. I have trusted in prayer to lead me to what I need to know. Rather than, I've kind of gone in it backwards, because my initial awakening had to do with an answer to prayer telling me. So it's kind of the opposite of what most people do, where they might research something thoroughly and then pray about it. For me, it was, I prayed about it, was told, and then I researched to understand why I received that answer. So that's been definitely a guiding force in discerning what I'm reading is true or not. That's important, to be able to have that discernment, but you're capable of that discernment. And as mothers, especially, mothers are given a gift of intuition for their families. We are responsible for the health of our children, and we have a God-given intuition to sense what is good and what is not. And when I think back on my experiences with injections in my children, I remember times when my heart would say no, and I would shut it off and go with the logic of what I'd been told, and I would turn it over to someone in a white coat, and I think about that and how often we as mothers do that. We don't trust ourselves and our knowing in those little quiet moments, or sometimes they're louder. Some mothers I know have had experiences where it's very loud inside, and yet still the fear grips them that maybe they don't really know. They can't really trust themselves. They don't, who am I, right? I think, as I mentioned, homeschool really started that in me, to be able to trust myself and know that I know what's best for my children. If I put in the time and the effort and the prayer, I can sense what each of them needs. And I don't need, an authority always to tell me what's needed. It's fine to start that way, but ultimately you can ask questions. You can listen to what your heart's saying. You can pay attention, and something in you will say, that's not true. That is true. That's right. Right. And it has to do with subtleties of light and darkness on the inside. So that's definitely a guide, not something that a lot of people, there are many people who would dismiss that, but that's, never led me wrong to research in that way. When I do that there, as far as the other issues that generally with the current virus or epidemic situation, there are many, many doctors being censored who I also value their opinion and consider everything that they say, because they also have express that sense of intuition and being able to tell what's true and what's not, and then having their research be guided by that. People like Dr. Thomas Cowan, Dr. Zach Bush, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Dr. Carrie Madej, Madej. These are all people who have very inquisitive minds with the narrative that we've been given, extensive training in their fields, experiences that have caused them to ask deeper questions, find, better answers to things that are going on right now. I know there's other ones that you also value in your research. Maybe you want to share some of
Oh,
those.
sure. No, I think those are all good. Sherry Tenpenny is another good one, who's a traditional doctor who has done a lot of research. And yeah, so many, this is great. You gave so many good ones. And I think that's the important thing, is that I love your talk about discernment. I love your just reminding us that we do have prayer for a reason, and that we can listen to our heart. And I loved hearing about your process, because for me, a lot of times it's prayer, going to research, and then more prayer. And I loved seeing your process, because I think everybody's process is just a little bit different. And I think it's important to recognize what works for you, and to just go for it, and to just really double down on whatever is working for you. I loved hearing throughout our chat, and just about how you've listened to that particular voice. And I think that it's completely invaluable. I think that it's very easy to undervalue what our heart is telling us, because we think we're crazy. And we think, oh, it can't be true because I'm just hearing it inside my head. No, that's probably the most valuable thing is what your heart's telling you. And it's hard to listen to that sometimes. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. So many good things. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I think that it's so important to just realize the different journeys, and to realize that this is a journey. And on behalf of Tricia and I, just want to invite you to ask questions, just like Tricia's talked about. Ask questions. We want to ask, and continue to research, and find really, really good sources. And to just remember that a lot of times those sources we have to take the time. It means sometimes you can find it on Google, but sometimes you have to go to DuckDuckGo and Brave. Sometimes you have to go other places and just ask for help, because sometimes it's a really hard. It was devastating to hear about the broken links, and I've had the same thing happen to me. I've had, just files where I was dumping links as well, and I would go to send them to family or friends when they'd ask questions, and they're gone, been taken down. And that's overwhelming and alarming. And yet for me, it tells me I'm looking in the right place. If they say don't listen to this person, then I want to go and hear everything that person had to say. And that's how come I know about a lot of these names that you've listed, is because you hear about people being censored. So you did talk about Children's Health Defense. And again, what's great about Children's Health Defense is that you have so many different peer-reviewed journals and studies being analyzed and being looked over by many different reporters through this network. And the whole thing that I love about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is that he loves the conversation. He loves a good debate. He wants to see all the sides. And that's what that whole site is about. And I'm on their email list. You probably are too. And I love getting the daily updates from them. It's wonderful. The other one that Colleen and I absolutely love is Del Bigtree, who runs the High Wire. That's a weekly show. One of the things I love about Del is he has a reporter, they call it the Jackson Report. Jackson does a great job of going out and researching so many things. And then he talks about them and he shows them on the show, but then you can go directly to everything that he mentions, just like in Children's Health Defense. They'll give you all the links to go directly to these studies and sources. But the other thing that I love about Del Bigtree is that he doesn't just talk about, while his purpose is health defense, he brings it from all the angles. He talks about censorship. He talks about just cultural funny things. He talks about all these things that are facing the world and ties it into everything that we're experiencing. So it is kind of a well-rounded show, and it's a great place to start. He does a good job. So again, we've given you lots of things to think about. We've given you lots of options. Tell us if somebody wants to find out more about your particular practice, Tricia, give us a little bit more information about where they can go to get help from you.
If you want to read about it, I have a website. It's lightworksbalance.com. And otherwise, I mean, if somebody's interested, I can, schedule out in advance, but otherwise I would suggest using a search engine and looking up a bioresonance practitioner near you, or biofeedback or bioenergetic scanning. There's many ways, biomeridian scanning. These are all terms for the same type of technology. The devices are a little bit different in their capabilities. But I definitely would recommend trying it if there are health issues that you haven't been able to resolve, or you just want to get a snapshot of what's going on in your body right now. I mean, just that alone is fascinating, to be able to see right now what is happening in my liver, and it's so specific and so interesting. Or maybe you are just weighed down emotionally. There is, the capability of identifying what those triggers are and what is needed to help resolve the issue. That sort of thing is, pretty mind-blowing that we can do that with this technology, and have it be so accurate. So I would recommend, if that's, piques your interest, looking into it in some way, for sure.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I think, again, just so much love to each of you listening today. Just again, know that you're not alone. Know that there are many of us on this journey. There are many of us trying so hard to research, to discover, and that there are beautiful souls out there, just like you and I and Tricia here, who are trying our best. And I would just say, again, we want to send you a lot of love. We want to send you light. We want to send you empowerment. And that's what I would say. So thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for
really
having me.
appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it very much.
Oh, you're wonderful. Well, okay. So from the Candy Colored Studio, lots of love from Tricia and I.
Bye.